Hello, I am a femboy. So I was given an option to do whatever I wanted for my final for my queer studies class. And so I've decided to come out here on this beautiful summer day and record a video talking about femboys. So, what even is a femboy? Um, this is a pretty hard question to answer because it is already such a new, underdocumented, and misunderstood thing. For my understanding of the way that the word is currently used in the current day, it generally is a way to describe someone who is assigned male at birth or identifies, with he/him pronouns, who likes to wear feminine clothing, especially that with the aesthetics of anime inspired aesthetics, essentially, where you have lots of skirts, lots of thigh highs, lots of crop tops, and all sorts of uh, all sorts of things associated with that. But I guess those aren't really the only way to express your femininity as a boy or a man or whatever. There's lots of other ways to express femininity and still count yourself under the umbrella of femboys. You can do like voice training or even adopt like feminine mannerisms or posture or makeup. It's even grown more common for femboys to use estrogen to literally change their bodies to fit the body type more of that aforementioned anime inspiration, which I'll get into a bit later. So there is kind of like a lot of history here, even though it is the newest queer identity or label. It's still up in the air, kind of what it fits under, if it fits under an identity or a label, or even just like a term or whatever. It's kind of in that in between space of what it is still being decided. It's still being discussed sociologically what exactly a femboy is. But there is enough history to talk about. Like, obviously, cross-dressing has been around for pretty much as humans have been around, but as much as gender norms have been around. But femboys, as far as I'm aware, is something that's a lot more contemporary. The term was pretty much coined or had its first usages in the 1990s. It was used to disparage men who weren't seen as masculine enough at the time. And eventually, over the course of the age of the internet, that ended up being quite a bit different and describing essentially what I'm describing now of that modernized, like anime-inspired concept of femininity being performed by boys or men. Femboys started being popularized in about 2018 to 2017. Beforehand, they obviously existed as a concept that was a bit more niche on internet spaces, but the two characters that can be kind of credited for the popularization of femboys as an idea on the internet are Felix Argyle from ReZero, an anime that started in 2016, and Astolfo from Fate Apocrypha, which started in 2017 and ended in 2017. Both of these characters ended up becoming very popular for the way that they had, challenged gender norms, essentially. A lot of this popularity came to form through memes, specifically like bait and switch memes, where you'd think you'd be clicking on like a video of like a cute anime girl and said, nope, that's actually a dude, you're gay, or even just some weird random edits. It really popularized the bait and switch meme in general, and this got them associated with the meme concept as well of traps. This is kind of what popularized the term trap as well, because a lot of this was centralized around the idea of these characters tricking you into thinking that they're women, and then the idea of being surprised when it's actually they're not a woman, it's actually dude, no way. Because these characters also embodied a lot of feminine traits that were very attractive, a lot of the femboy concept also got popularized over pornography. So with a lot of these memes and the concept of traps becoming very popular, there was also a specific question that got popularized as a meme as well, and that is, are traps gay? Or are you gay for like being into a trap because they just perform femininity well enough for you to be attracted, essentially? If they perform femininity well enough for me, a straight man, to be attracted, now that shouldn't make me automatically gay. That was pretty much the idea. The problem with this being meme culture, however, is the fact that very quickly it ended up poisoning a lot of actual culture. And in that way, trap ended up becoming essentially a slur because of the implication of trickery. And a lot of it was being associated with trans women who aren't looking to like trick you into thinking that they're women. They're just women, like, and so like the implication that the intention is trickery is offensive, which is why it is considered a slur for trans women now. That being said, I still think it's an okay word to say if you are describing a man who identifies that way still, like intentionally trying to trick you, like the intentionality of the trickery is what turns it from an accurate descriptor to a slur, essentially. Because me personally, I personally like the idea of tricking people. I personally think it's funny when people see me when I'm in a cute outfit on the side of the road and they say, wow, that's a cute girl. Like, that's really funny to me. And I find it validating towards my presentation, not particularly what my gender is, if that makes any sense. A lot of these memes got popularized in 2018, which was about when I actually got exposed to femboys as a concept. Unfortunately, I was a child and it was through pornography, but it wasn't just me that experienced that. It was pretty much the entirety of Gen Z along with me that had this exposure due to the internet. Specifically, femboys as a concept became really popular within the aforementioned anime communities on the internet, as well as furry communities. And because a lot of this exposure came from porn involving these communities and femboys, this is where a new problem begins in 2019 and especially 2020, because the COVID pandemic putting everyone's eyes on the screen. And that problem is oversexualization. Femboys exploded in popularity in 2018, 2019, and 2020 as a porn category. They also exploded on TikTok and other platforms with a lot of young Generation Z users. This was especially catapulted by the 2020 e-boy and e-girl culture. What emerged was a pipeline, essentially, whether intentional or not, that led a lot of these young teenagers, minors, starting getting exposed to maybe what might be like one or two seemingly innocent bait and switch memes, but then eventually getting recommended more and more suggestive stuff up until they were essentially pointed in the direction of like femboy porn. And like I said, this is actually like really common, even outside of like femboy specifically. This is actually a pretty common way of children who use the internet finding out any sort of sexual kink or fetish, or even just sex in general. It's like systemic mass grooming that is self-perpetuated. Like, and it really disturbs me to think about like how much I know about sexuality was learning from other minors, other kids who were my age, because it was a self-perpetuating cycle, in which there was no one perpetrator to blame or boogeyman to take down. This is still a thing, by the way. This is still a problem. And all of this really leads to this massive issue of objectification, where femboys are only really seen as like sex objects or a porn category, essentially. They get invalidated, they get bullied, they get groomed, they get preyed on in all sorts of ways that you can possibly imagine, and it becomes a real problem. And as with that kind of mass systemic grooming issue, this is also something that persists to this day. And it's made even worse by the fact that this is essentially the entire age range of Generation Z. It all ranges from young teenagers to people who are going into their 30s. And when you have that large of an age range coming together for one specific queer identity or label, and especially one riddled in so much controversy and weirdness, things get really bad and a ridiculous amount of people get hurt. This also ends up leading to issues with body standards and body positivity. Essentially, the inspiration from anime characters backfires, the popularity in porn backfires, and unreachable standards are set. A lot of insecurities and bullying end up manifesting as a consequence. And you can see a lot of this insecurity manifesting to this day, where if you go essentially on any sort of safe for work femboy subreddit, for example, you will see a lot of posts asking whether or not they can be a femboy if they are like fat, or if they can be a femboy if they are black, so on and so forth. People insecure about whether or not they even fit the bill, so to speak, because of these standards. And thankfully, a lot of these communities are trying their best to fix this. They're trying their best to make sure everyone feels valid and safe. But there's really only so much you can do when the view in the mainstream eyes is set in stone, essentially. I think it can be done. It's just going to take a very long time of trying to rewrite that mainstream sensibility of what a femboy is. Another thing that ties in to a lot of the body standards and insecurity is the fact that a lot of the most popular femboys and the ones that get the most attention are just people with estrogen, or even just trans women who use the femboy tag to kind of piggyback off of that popularity that it has. And this goes into another really weird aspect of femboys as a community. And that weird aspect is what our place even is in the queer community. Because there's a good amount of controversy even within the queer community about femboys. And it feels like sometimes we can get a lot of flack from in the queer community and from out the queer community. For a lot of femboys, it can feel like everyone is out to get you, which is a real issue, especially when, you know, queer spaces are supposed to be like safe for us. Aside from all of that, I saw this one video actually from this YouTuber, Chris the Femboy, who's quite popular. And the whole point of the video was essentially saying, oh, you don't need to be gay to be a femboy, and you don't need to be LGBTQ if you're a femboy. And I just like to say, no, that's fucking wrong. Obviously, you don't have to be gay to be a femboy. There are a lot of straight femboys out there, but listen, if you are a femboy, you are queering the gender norms that exist within our society, okay? And that is what the Q is in LGBTQ. So I'm sorry if you're straight and you're a femboy, you are part of the LGBTQ. You are queer. Queer! But yeah, bottom line, if you're a femboy, you are at least queer. You fall under the queer umbrella and the LGBTQ plus umbrella. It's Pride Month. It's your month. Okay, you don't have a choice here. Like, you're one of us. Anyways, back to the topic of like femboys' place in the queer community. I feel like there's a lot of weird infighting actually, because like I said, a lot of the body standards are set by trans women who post in femboy communities or using femboy tags, or femboys who still identify as boys, who still identify with that, but use estrogen. And estrogen can really bring out a lot of more feminine body features that you just can't have without it, essentially. Now, that first brings the question, like, do trans women actually have a place in femboy communities? Because I feel like maybe that's a bit degrading to their identity as a woman, wouldn't it? I mean, I'm not a trans woman, so I can't really speak on that. But that is an easy assumption to make. And a lot of people have called into question the presence of trans women in femboy communities because of that. And one thing I've seen in response to that is this really weird, interesting take, is that trans women do this purely because femboys are more popular than trans women. And femboys are actually stealing the thunder of trans women and women in general. And I think the place that this idea comes from is that there is some sort of limited attention economy, or even, in my opinion, like an actual economy tied to the performance of femininity. My personal theory for why these kinds of competition is perceived between femboys and trans girls is that there's like a fight for resources here. I think it probably comes subconsciously, just from the fact that rich men essentially give money and attention, a limited amount so, to the people who are best at performing sexualized femininity, specifically for these rich men, or just men in general. I have a feeling that this is subconsciously what drives the idea of femininity as a competition. Because obviously, when the men are setting this incentive, it becomes a competition to see who can perform this femininity the best to get these rewards. And really, in the end, no one wins but the men. So yeah, that's where I think the idea that femboys are stealing the thunder comes from. Which I think it's a bit dumb to get mad at femboys for that, because it is a game we are actively supposed to lose. Much like capitalism, I think it's better to get angry at capitalism and rich people, because that's what sets up this game for us to lose, essentially. And when I say us, I don't just mean femboys or women. I mean like everyone who wants to have like a feminine gender or just be feminine is automatically placed into this game. Because it's supposed to make us infight. It's supposed to make us compete against each other and become divided. That's the whole point. And every time you spread hate about femboys for this issue, you are losing the game and you are letting the rich men win, essentially. Another point to make about femboys' place in the queer community is femboys are actually like trans women in disguise. Well, not really. That's just what people have said to me. A bit too much. A take I've seen a bit too often is the idea that being a femboy is actually like an in-between for boys who are exploring femininity. But the idea is that the end result is 100% of the time going to be a trans woman. The idea that no one can be fully idealized as a femboy, only a trans woman or an estrogenated femboy who still identifies with he, him pronouns. I think that's really stupid. I think that is an incredibly binary way to think, and it is incredible that I've seen people within the queer community, particularly educated people, have this take. It's ridiculous to me. It actually makes me quite angry. And I hope I shouldn't have to explain to you why telling other people what their identity is or isn't is wrong. But unfortunately, that comes along with the game of femboys still being new and an under-documented, under-researched idea, you know, to the point where I have trouble even calling it an identity or a label or a gender identity or a gender itself or whatever. It's kind of just a word at this point, that where the meaning is ever changing and being discussed sociologically, like I said at the beginning of this video. That being said, while I think it's insane to believe that all femboys are trans women in progress, I think there is something to be said about whether or not femboys are actually cis. And this goes further into the idea that everything is a spectrum. I do believe that transness is a spectrum. It embodies a lot more than pronouns ever could. And I think gender presentation is very much a part of that. And clothing styles and fashion styles and femininity is a part of all of that. The way that I think of it, gender and sexuality has kind of just like a million different parameters, variables that can be set like an infinite amount of values, essentially. And for every single person, all of this infinite amount of parameters is randomized. And in that sense, I like to say every person's gender is personalized. Because it is just a mix and match of like whatever the hell you were raised around, whatever the hell you happen to like, whatever the hell you happen to just be. And under that lens, I'd like to categorize cis as your true like inner self of all these parameters, generally matching what you were supposed to be raised as. And for transness to be you taking matters into your own hands and realizing that who you are on the inside does not match like what you were raised as, and having that struggle, having to think about your gender identity in the first place and actualize yourself to be who you actually are on the inside. And in that way, from that lens, the idea of a femboy being called a trans identity makes sense to me. Because at the end of the day, I have a lot more in common with my trans brothers and sisters than I ever would with some cis guy who's never had to think about or struggle with gender identity in his life. Generally speaking, in conclusion, all these questions about what femboys are and aren't, all these questions about us and our identities, who we are on the inside and outside, how we like to present, I think all of it is secondary to the fact that what we are is human, and getting reduced down into a porn category or the butt of the joke or some trend that takes attention away from other identities or a trans woman in progress. All of those reductions are incredibly hurtful, and I believe that should be the first thing we tackle when it comes to living in this world as like a community of like humans, because it is far too often we reduce people to simplistic ideas, to single stories, if you will. And yeah, I think that is all I have to say. Thanks for watching, or something like that.